Welcome to BioGenerator. I'm Jim McCarter, Senior Managing Director. BioGenerator creates, builds, and invests in companies that are solving important problems in human health and agriculture. We're the startup arm of BioSTL, which for 25 years has been building the innovation economy in St. Louis. So we've invested $50 million over the last 20 years to help start 136 companies in St. Louis. And those companies have gone on to raise over $2.8 billion in follow-on investment and create over 1,000 jobs. We've also supported 170 companies. Yeah. Thank you. We've also supported 170 companies with space here at BioGenerator Labs in Cortex and at the Helix Center in 39 North. So this is our 6th Innovators Hour at BioGenerator. We're doing this once a month, and we're delighted to have a record turnout today, and we hope you'll consider joining us in the coming months for our conversations with the founders of C2N and Alzheimer's diagnostics, with R&R and neuromodulation, with plastomics and plant transformation, with Paradex and genoscopy and cancer diagnostics, and with Bond in genetic disease therapeutics. So just search Innovators Hour at BioGenerator for our website and more information. So today I'm pleased to speak with Ed Weinstein, currently CEO at Panome Bio, and Dave Smoller, entrepreneur in residence at BioGenerator and board member of Panome Bio. Now, if you don't know Dave and Ed, you're in for a treat today, as they are two of St. Louis's most successful biotech entrepreneurs. Dave is the founder of numerous companies, 4 of which have been acquired, and 2 of those exits are companies that he co-founded with Ed. So not only that, but they're both native St. Louisans, and if I have this right, 3rd generation?
You maybe.
Yes, my children are 4th generation St. Louis.
Okay, so the kids are 4th generation.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so let's start with Dave. And so now, Dave, you left St. Louis after growing up here. You left for Atlanta to attend Emory for both undergraduate and your PhD. And you returned to St. Louis in 1989 for your postdoc with Dan Hartle. And that, he was the chair of genetics at WashU. And those were the early days of what became the genomics revolution, with Maynard Olson, Bob Waterston, Eric Green, and others who became prominent academics in the field. But you took a somewhat different path in that you left academia in 1992 to start your first company, Genome Systems.
Yeah, I went to the dark side, yeah, for sure, yeah.
So, but that wasn't something that people did in St. Louis in the early 1990s. So, tell us a bit about the decision to leave WashU and to start that company, and a little bit about kind of how you got started, where you were, how you funded it, what the product was.
Yeah, those are great days. You were there too, a little bit after me, right? And the whole genome project was an exciting time. But I have a sort of philosophy about life. You kind of get a fork in the road and you take the one that gives you the less anxiety, right? And so Dan Hartle got an offer to leave WashU and go to Harvard and take his $1 million endowment. And I thought, my family's from St. Louis, my brother's here, my parents are here, do I really want to leave and go to Boston? And so I thought, well, I'll just start a company for a couple weeks and figure it out. Literally was the thing. As postdocs, you sit around and you talk about, in those days, they were starting the biotech startup world kind of thing. And so you have this sort of fantasy discussion about becoming a entrepreneur or something like that. But I had no desire to have any risk in my life, right? I did not.
So you did the riskiest thing.
I did the riskiest thing, right? Yeah. Well, for me, it didn't seem that way, right? I just,
So paint the picture of the company in the early days.
Yes.
Where were you physically located?
Yes, we were physically located on the edge of the city and the county. We actually had to move our books to one side to the other so we wouldn't get taxed. I mean, that's how we were in recessed part of Maplewood, or the city, above a dress shop that was out of business, across from Section 8 housing with drug deals and all kinds of bodily fluids in the alleyways. So that was the start. It was a garage. We made our lab bench was a Formica top and 2 unpainted kitchen pieces of furniture from Home Depot, and our Bunsen burner was a propane tank. And so that's it. I borrowed, it cost me $50 to own half the company, get a corporation in those days in Missouri. And I borrowed $5,000 from Dad to build a brochure.
And so, but you went to product pretty quickly. Like how soon after from incorporation to you actually had a product offering?
So the mission of the company was really to take the Genome Project to the masses, right? So I was at the Genome Project. In this case, it was the Fruit Fly Genome Project. There was a worm and there was a human, and we were isolating genes for in a random approach. And every day, Dan Hartle would give me, one of his buddies would want some gene isolated, and I'd have to do it. And I thought, well, why not give everybody access? And so I took all these libraries that I had built, and others had built in this technology in those days to hunt genes, and we moved it into the lab, got a freezer, and literally I found this guy that had an existing company in that space, and he had a little SBIR grant that we stole money from, and paid me. I took a pay cut for my postdoc. I actually had gone to Monsanto when he left, and spent 6 months there, and at night I would work with this broken PCR box. And
so from those humble beginnings, though, 4 years later, the company was acquired by Insight Genomics, which is a kind of big time deal. So you went to 4 years out of after grad school. You've got something like 250 people reporting to you, and you're vice president of a major biotech company.
Yeah, so we grew to about 20 people at Genome Systems. We moved obviously to a bigger space in Olivet, and still had a lot of unpainted furniture and Formica tops, but we grew pretty good, and we helped isolate BRCA1 and 2 from Myriad. And we did the colon cancer. We were right in the middle of all that stuff, but we got $995 for each of those genes. And obviously, Myriad did pretty well on those. But we were growing because everybody wanted access to these big pieces of DNA and do this walking. And then I wanted to beat the Genome Project. I thought they were doing it wrong, and I thought with the technology we had, and so I went and asked Craig Venter at Solera, and he said he didn't have any money. And then I found I went to a conference, hunted down the Insight people, who were another sequencing company that had pieces of DNA that could help me with the Genome Project. And they said, yeah, let's do that. By the way, I was in law school at night as well. So I was, yeah, right. And they wanted to do a joint venture, and then it turned out, they just said, hey, you know what? This is too complicated. We're just going to buy you. I said, sure. And then we grew to 250 people. So we were hiring 11 people a day. Right, yeah. It was crazy. We built 4 buildings in St. Louis, all near the airport, near Thermo, I think the big thermal place in Berkeley.
Yeah, and so what did you learn from your experience at Insight?
3-letter acronyms, for sure. I was, literally knew nothing about business, right? I came out of my postdoc. I'll tell you one story when we actually raised $250,000 with Amical oil technology before we got acquired. And that was because we were working with a company called Visus, which got bought by Abbott, that was making DNA diagnostics using what's called fish probes. Won't go into detail. And they were one of our customers. And I said, well, if you give us some money, we might be able to get some automation. We might be able to do this faster. And so they brought down the president of Amoco Technology Corporation. So the oil company had tried to diversify into photoelectric batteries and airplane engines, in this case diagnostics, because oil was so cheap at the time. And so the president of Amoco Technology Corporation, some technology people. My office was the break room, and we had a garage, we had a dining room table that I got off of Craigslist for $50. I had my Home Depot particle board, desk, and I had a Commodore 165 because my cousin worked for a Commodore. I got it for free. And I remember at the end, they're like, yeah, this is really great. We'd be glad to help you and so forth. If you could give me a 5-year pro forma profit and loss statement. And I went, okay. Nodded my head and smiled. I had no clue what a profit and loss statement was. We literally the entire books was those large green sheets I know you guys are too young for this stuff, but there was no QuickBooks, there was no nothing. We were writing down check number. It's like a giant checkbook. And my fiance at the time, was not my wife, was an accountant. And so we literally, another accountant wrote on a piece of paper, revenue, COGS, SG&A, R&D, and said, fill this out. And I'm like, okay. And we had to put all that stuff, I had to get historical data. So I put it all, we got a program on a DOS computer, and we filled all the data into it, and I was able to punch out historical numbers. And then I told Amico that I had no idea what's going to happen in 5 years. How about 2 years? I did it.
But that was enough.
That was enough. I went to Kinko's. I put the cover of the brochure. I put a glossy, put a little binder on it, and handed it to them, and they gave me $250,000.
Excellent.
Yeah,
So,
that was it. Woohoo!
so we could go on all day with
could,
with Dave's stories. Well, let's turn to Ed. So Ed, you left St. Louis for the University of Michigan for undergrad, and then to Harvard for your PhD in genetics. And you returned, if I get this right, to St. Louis around 2000. So it's about 10 years after Dave came back. And you worked for Pharmacia and for Pfizer. You went to Merck for a while. But tell us about your decision to pursue a career in industry after your academic work, and what was the attraction, and what was your experience like in the early years of your career before you started working with Dave?
The good old days. When I was in grad school.
And if we can move the mic a little closer, I think.
Yeah. When I was in grad school, I knew that I wanted to go into industry. It was unusual, but not that unusual. I'm much younger than Dave. I went straight from that into the cancer research group at Pharmacia, which was Monsanto Corporate Research at the time. I just knew that I liked the idea of having been in graduate school and studying one molecular pathway for 5 years, this being on different projects and things getting changed up, and always having that kind of variability that was more fit into my style of being unable to focus on one thing for very long. So yeah.
Great. And so if we kind of now get to the part of the story where you two start working together, so that we're moving closer to that. So that started about 20 years ago, and I think, Dave, you joined Sigma Aldrich in 2004, thereabouts, and Ed in 2005. So I'd like to hear from each of you kind of what was the opportunity that drew you to the company, and what was your original focus when you got there, and I'm curious your first recollections of meeting each other and working together.
I remember.
Do you remember it?
I don't know a
No.
clue. I remember why I went to Sigma.
Yeah, why did you go to Sigma?
So I had just sold my second company to Merck, and I had been working for Merck for about a year, and they were consolidating up in Wisconsin, and then I had to commute to Wisconsin, California, and Darmstadt, Germany, and I hate flying. So I got an opportunity to be CEO of a startup, and I was up at Johnson Wax, meeting Fitz Johnson, the billionaire, because he had a little venture fund and he owned one of these startups and wanted me to be the CEO, and that was the last interview. And I got into the car to go back to the airport, and the president of Sigma called me and said, "Hey, I heard you're free. Would you want to come and head up R&D at Sigma?" And I said, "Well, you got 24 hours to give me an offer." And they gave me an offer that was worse than the startup, and I took it. Because, I don't know, startups are tough, right? And I remember saying to myself, well, on my tombstone, it's going to say, finally, a consistent day in Dave Smoller's death or life. And so corporate America seemed like something that would be more stable.
But it seemed it fit at least into the sort of research tools and services. How did that premise work?
Yeah, I mean, Sigma was obviously a company in my backyard that I knew and grew up with and had a lot of nostalgia with, and it was obviously something that everybody that is in the tool space wanted to be part of, and so I ended up going there, and then a couple of years later became head of operations and R&D, and then eventually became president of the business unit, and then eventually became chief scientist, and this sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
he was the man. I mean,
Yeah, and so Ed, how about you?
guy.
What drew you to Sigma?
I was working at Merck in West Point, Pennsylvania. Great job, and I love being in the pharmaceutical industry, and we wanted to come back to St. Louis. My kids were young, and all my family is here, and Dave had an opening in his functional genomics group.
Yeah, right.
There was a...
So did Dave hire you, or did
Dave hired me?
Okay.
Well,
I don't know who hired you.
No,
Yeah.
Hank George was
Hank
the
George,
guy
yeah.
who...
Yeah, I don't think genomics is no longer functional anymore.
Oh, it's not functional
genomics.
genomics. It was this great collaboration that Dave brought Sigma into with Eric Lander at the Whitehead and David Sabatini and a number of people, big pharmaceutical companies that are all working to develop RNAi, shRNA. And Sigma had the opportunity to commercialize it. So that's when I first understood how research tools worked, and that research and operations and it all being one thing. And up until then, I thought Sigma was just putting a lot of chemicals in small bottles, and this was totally different. Research challenge, scientific challenge, but also logistical challenges and operational challenges, and that's what was fun.
So sort of early days of using gene silencing and then gene editing tools in research. And so one of the things that you all worked on together was what became Sage Labs. And so tell us a little bit about that, about, this is creating laboratory animals that have, tell us the story of kind of like how did Sigma get into that?
This one started again with a licensing opportunity. Dave brought in zinc finger nucleases from Sangamo Technology. Sangamo wanted to focus on ZFNs as a therapeutic, and Dave licensed it into Sigma for creating reagents, cell lines, and animals. So we somehow convinced Sigma to fund an animal model creation group. We opened a lab over in Westport. There was I think it was your
Yeah, it was
abandoned
actually
lab.
my old, so at Insight, the first company that acquired me, right, we built an animal facility for mice. And when Insight became a pharmaceutical company and laid off all 2,000 of us, as biotech companies do, we raised $600 million. Again, Insight went from $1 billion to an $8 billion company in 6 weeks. And every single one of my direct reports became millionaires. And we raised $600 million, and then went down to nothing again. And we built that facility, and it became empty for almost a decade, I guess. Yeah. And so I knew it existed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So we knew this was going to work. We had zinc finger nucleases that could theoretically make animals. We had this huge animal facility that had been sitting there empty for a decade. And Dave somehow convinced the CEO of Sigma to put a little bit of money into it. We started Sage Labs. Sage was Sigma Aldrich Genetic Engineering. And we made mice and rats and rabbits and monkeys.
He made the first knockout or genetically modified rat ever. He's in science. This is a big shot. Yeah.
My team did. I did not actually make them. The first genetically engineered rabbit. And that was all over Westport. Our neighbors are like Safelight and a trucking company, and we've got 10,000 rats breeding in the
And mice.
And who are your customers?
Mostly pharmaceutical companies, biotechs who didn't want to do their own animal model creation, pharmas that were looking to outsource. It's a good business to be a contract research company in, because it takes a ton of space and specialized equipment and stuff like that. And if you're a big pharma and you're going to make 5-10 animals a year, you don't want to build that all out yourself. And then on top of that, we had this exclusive license to a technology that let us make animals 5-10 times faster than what other people were doing with embryonic stem cells, and it just kind of changed the industry.
Yeah. And you couldn't do rats or anything with rats. Since Mario Capecchi got the Nobel Prize for making the first transgenic mice. It was all done in embryonic stem cells. Mm-hmm. No one could figure out how to do embryonic stem cells or anything else. And by the way, Joe Bedell's here over there. If you have time, ask him about the hypoallergenic cat that we were going to make. That was a secret, double secret project.
We did make it.
Which is probably still a good idea, right?
Yeah, you knock out a gene called FeLD1 that we tried to do. that's another story for another time.
Yes.
But Joey was part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then eventually Sage Labs got spun out of Sigma, and I'm curious kind of how that happened, and also if you can tie in kind of Telegraph Hill Partners and how they were involved in that.
Yeah. When the CEO of Sigma passed away, we reorganized and I became chief scientist, and then that wasn't really, if anybody knows me, I'm no chief scientist for sure. And I left, and I got a call the day I left and said, hey, you built this animal facility in a chemical company. We don't know what to do with it. And it was really great. When I was president, the reason it got built is I secretly hired all these people. Right, we had hiring freezes and all that stuff, and Ed and I would, secretly hire people, and I don't even think they knew half the time what we were doing.
We were just, okay, there was a policy not to hire, but what are they going to do? So we would just make offers and bring people in. And,
right.
Yeah.
So
it worked.
And then we acquired a freaking breeding facility in Philadelphia. Yeah, Ace Labs. We bought that. All at Sigma, right?
So the business, though, didn't quite fit into the more traditional.
They got scared out of their mind when we left. Like, what the hell we're going to do with this animal company? And we make chemicals. They couldn't get the rats into the little bottles with the red tops.
So how did the spin out happen?
So I've known Telegraph Hill for a long time because at Insight, Deval Lashkari, another is a partner there, and he and I were at Insight together, and he went into venture, I went into entrepreneurship. And so I gave him a call and said, hey, Sigma is calling us, they want to spin this thing out. But I was an officer of the company at Sigma, and so we had to go into a bidding process with really big companies. I mean, really big companies. And I remember telling Ed, Ed was a director of this whole thing. I said, Ed, you're going to become president of this thing, and your title for the rest of your life will never not have president in the title. It may be vice president, it might be executive president, it might be something else, because you're going to become an entrepreneur, and you never go backwards. And I think it came out true, didn't it?
That was a curse.
That was a curse. Right. And so we went into a bidding war. I remember I was in New York with my family for Christmas, and we had gone back and forth and bidding, and they came up another $1 million, the other group. And I told Telegraph Hill, it ain't worth it. I just can't. I'm a cheap guy to begin with, and they said, so I remember going to the hotel room, and the entire Telegraph Hill was on the phone, and they said, Dave, $1 million doesn't matter. We're just going to do it, and they bid the extra $1 million, and they bought. They invested in us. Yeah, crazy, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you built up Sage Labs further. The company continued to do well and succeed, and revenue increased. You eventually sold the company a few years later.
Yeah. So first of all, you got to remember the time. So the day after we did the deal, guess what happened? Anybody know what year was that? 2012?
12, 13.
Remember who got the Nobel Prize just recently for gene editing? Yeah, So Doudna's lab came out with CRISPR-Cas9. Oh, shit. Sorry, did I say that? Right, so I had a technology that was not the greatest and greatest, right?
Because you were using zinc fingers or talons?
We were using zinc finger nucleases. That's what we had at Sigma.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
where we had.
So now there's a better technology.
We have better technology, and we're racing to find, get into Berkeley's lab and get it. And it turned out that Jennifer had given all her rights to her grad student, Rachel Horowitz, right? And so I'm calling the grad student and begging her to give me an exclusive license for animals. And we did that deal. Yeah.
So you were the first to license CRISPR-Cas9 for animal research, right?
For anything.
For anything. Oh, the first of any for any use.
Yeah,
okay.
we were the first one.
I think you're the third talk of the 6 that is using CRISPR-Cas9 technology.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Good stuff.
All right. And it was a similar situation, right? Because Rachel started a company called Caribou that focused on therapeutics, and we were the ones who could help them get it out into the world as a reagent or something for, if animals are reagents, to use it in a different way, and it was beneficial to them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge of this Innovators Hour is actually getting to the topic of Panome, and we are getting closer, and we're getting there. So and to kind of jump us ahead a little bit. So after you sold Sage Labs, it was around and correct.
Yeah, we sold it in a year and a half.
Okay.
Because I was trying to, so he was running everything. I ran nothing. So Ed ran everything. Everybody reported to him. I had a bench. Thank you for letting me work in my bench. And then I was looking to try to do M&A and technology access and things like that. And we tried to buy some big animal company, right? And I got bought for 400, and we bid 90 or something. I don't remember, but
we were off a little bit.
We were off a little bit, right? And then we ended up. I ended up talking to my buddy who worked for me at Sigma, Eric Rhodes, who now went to Horizon, and they had been working on using CRISPR for cell lines. And so the idea of having a company that had cell line engineering as well as animals seemed like a good thing. And I said, we wanted to buy you. And he said, no, we just raised $100 million on the AIM, and we're going to buy you. And they literally flew down, that week or something?
Yeah, that was very quick.
Yeah. And I remember the PowerPoint. So they showed us a PowerPoint of the acquisition, and it basically, we got to the number was like $48 million, and we kind of just went, okay,
It was like 10 times more than we thought.
Right.
Yeah, it was good.
Right. So in a year and a half, we got bought. You stuck around.
Yeah, so I know you worked there a little while longer, but then it was around, I think, 2016 or thereabouts that you began working with BioGenerator. And correct me if I get this wrong, but sort of using a venture studio model for the first time that BioGenerator had gone into the, actually creating companies as opposed to, investing in a new company that was already formed. And so you created Canopy Biosciences with Dave was involved, Crystal Winkler, and then Ed, you were the CEO of Canopy. So that was the first kind of BioGenerator venture studio company creation. So kind of curious to hear a little bit about that, and then how did that set the stage for Panome?
I think that it was groundbreaking, right? That Dave's idea with Charlie Bolton and Crystal Winkler to be able to put together a number of different technologies that were coming out of technology transfer offices, find things that weren't maybe necessarily companies in and of themselves, but just tools that could all be grouped together and turned into companies. And then BioGenerator making such a really significant commitment to it. I think that was your biggest investment at the time, and it drew a lot more investments because of that. It's kind of crazy, right? People were investing just by us saying we're going to find technologies and bring them together.
We bet on the jockeys. Literally, that was the idea. I remember you presenting to back then, the IAC committee or whatever it was, right? And the whole idea was we were going to bet on Ed. And, we bet on the jockeys and not the horse. And we'd find horses. And, we had some technologies, but
it worked.
It worked. We didn't do the technologies we started with. We pivoted. Yeah.
Nothing. And it eventually was the creation of spatial genomics. Yeah. That's not where it started, but that's what it became.
Yeah. The proteomics, which was an acquisition from another company in Germany, Zellkraftwerks. We did some transcriptional profiling that was really just using nanostrings technology, but being a service arm for it. None of those stuff was what we were originally working on, but turned it into a good service company.
So Canopy Bio is a service company. We're working on one now called Cappy Bio. There's Solus AgriSciences that Dave helped create. There's and Ed too, and Panome Bio now. But talk us through, because we're building more of these companies. What is the premise of a research tools and services company, and how can that be attractive in terms of returns to investors, as opposed to, because this is not sort of a pharmaceutical home run, right?
Yeah, it's the opposite of a unicorn, right? And so, I'm a big believer. In the Midwest, we have a problem, right? Financing is tough, right? So financing therapeutic companies in the hundreds of millions of dollars is tough, right? East Coast, West Coast, not. But tools companies are picking shovels for the pharmaceutical company. It's kits, it's services. We were lucky that we raised a couple $1 million with Kingdom Capital, all that stuff for Canopy, and then we ended up raising more money with a group out of Ampersand, a big VC fund out of Boston, I guess.
Boston.
Right, yeah. And so they helped us acquire companies. But that's exactly how it works, is that you take these, kits and reagents and tools, and you put them together, and then if you're lucky, you get enough capital to buy other companies or other products, and you roll them all together, and you make a tools company. And to be honest, the BioGenerator was clearly an enabler, right? They gave us, I don't call it a blank check, but gave us enough money to build this idea. We called it an umbrella organization. That's why it's called Canopy, the first one, right? Where we roll things into it, and and you don't need a lot of money. You don't need $100 million. I mean, I think remember $50 and $5,000 from Dad for the first one. Second one I raised a couple million was Proteoplex. The third one was Canopy, and we probably raised, I don't know, a couple million. Then the acquisitions were maybe double digit there, millions. And then you can exit at, reasonable. You don't need to exit at, 300 million or 400 million. There's a great return, right? I mean, I think we're the highest IRR for Telegraph Hill for Sage. We sold it in a year and a half. I think it was 4 or 5 times their investment. I mean, that's great. And we built people.
Yeah, 4x in 18 months is better than 10x in 12 years.
Yeah, right. If everybody talked to me about, time and money, I was always told that you have to sell a company and get it back to the investors in 5 years, and that's what we did. I don't know, it worked.
Yeah, and it built something that's, not permanent, but something lasting in St. Louis, right? I mean, Sage Labs is still here. It's called, it's part of Innovative, but there's still people there. And Canopy's
still here. Canopy is, I think, 50 people in St. Louis and 30 people in this building.
Yeah.
Even though they're part of Bruker in Boston.
I mean, the original thing that Charlie Bolton came to me and said, I've got 55 companies in this portfolio right now, and 125 badges that get into the lab space. Do the math. How many jobs have we made per company? 2?
Yeah.
Right? All the companies in the tool space need manufacturing, need marketing local, need salespeople, obviously, in the region. And so every one of them, Panome is 20 people. 20 people.
Yeah.
And,
20 people in Panome.
Right. Solus is over 30.
Solus is getting close to 40.
Yeah, both those companies are less than 24 months old. Right? I mean, we're building,
it's rapid economic development.
Exactly. My personal thing is we should do just tools and reagents in St. Louis, right? It doesn't cost much. We've got the people.
Well, maybe okay, let's get to Panome, and then we're going to come back to that, of this, building more and more of these companies. So, you've both been involved with BioGenerator, you built Canopy, and several others. And but tell us more of the Panome story, and either one of you, but the two of you are co-founders, along with Tom Cohen at BioGenerator, and then with Gary Patty at Washington University. And what was the kind of premise of Panome?
I think Tom and Gary were the ones that were initially discussing the fact that Gary had a fantastic technology in metabolomics, has a lot of infrastructure in place through Washington University. I think he runs the core there, as well as just having a lot of LCMS instruments in his lab and capabilities.
Liquid chromatography, mass spec.
Yes,
that's it. And he and Tom realized that there was just a great business opportunity. People were actually coming to Gary, pharmaceutical companies needing his assistance and things, but it wasn't set up properly to be able to serve customers, and they turned that into reality. It all happened through WashU, so the Office of Technology Transfer, helping move that along. Nicole and her team.
You have a management service agreement with Washington University that gives you access to how many mass spec instruments in Gary's lab?
There's 20 or 25
28,
or something.
I think it's 28.
28 mass specs.
Gary just got the presidential award, I think, for ASMS for something. I mean, he's the guru.
I mean, this is pretty remarkable. You have one of the world leaders in the field in your backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's chief
absolutely.
scientist. Yeah,
And he's our chief scientist, and he's got all this extra capacity. And we have mass specs here
yeah.
downstairs, or here on this floor. But there's a ton of extra capacity, so it's good for WashU because there is a master service agreement in place. And we're getting that out to, I mean, we've been, like Dave said, we've been in business for a couple of years now, but we've got, 100 customers that have the services now and know about Gary's name and his capabilities, and it's all tied in with
and
ours.
that rare thing called revenue. Yeah,
Revenue right away.
revenue.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't hear that much often, do we? Right.
So talk to us a little bit about the technology of metabolomics of two things. When I know that Gary's instruments can and his algorithms can detect 300,000 different molecules, whereas sort of the state of the art until Panome was 3,000 molecules, or usually.
Right.
And so that's 2 orders of magnitude. Who wants that information? What are they doing with that information?
If you're doing discovery, you want to cast as wide of a net as possible, right? When you do whole genome sequencing, you're sequencing the whole genome. But when you were doing metabolomics, you were only looking at a subset of a couple hundred to a couple thousand metabolites. And Gary's technology changes that. So when you do metabolomics, now you're looking at the whole metabolome. So instead of seeing a few hundred metabolites, you can see a couple thousand. You get a better understanding of the biology, of the pathways involved. You just get a much deeper understanding of the biology.
And so the samples that are coming to you, are these from animal models, or are these from cell culture, or patients?
All sorts of stuff. Yeah, animal models, cell culture, patients. We had a study with a company where we were looking at blood samples of patients before they entered a clinical trial. And by looking at the metabolites in the patients, we can actually stratify who's going to respond or not respond to the drug before they take the first dose. We've had people who are doing cell culture where we can identify what metabolites are getting used up in spent media, and you can identify what you need to supplement in to increase productivity. CAR T companies to understand whether their CAR Ts are going to work.
You guys have layered on multiomics, right, and proteomics now, and so one of the big things that we do at Panome is multiomics, and real multiomics, right? Layering pathway biology from proteins and metabolites, and really finding the needle in the haystack, right?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You build these companies by having a core technology, but then you've got to keep expanding the platform of what it is you're offering, whether it's tools or services. You spend so much money in the business development to find a customer, you want to have a lot to offer them. And this has just been a natural way to expand, get into proteomics and RNA, transcriptional profiling, and then put them all together.
Yeah, so talking with Tom about this today and this idea of expanding the offerings, so you've got transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, but you also have global metabolomics, universal metabolomics, you've got phosphoproteomics, you've got ubiquitin ubiquitinomics?
I don't know what it's called. Yes, ubiquitinomics, yes.
Lots of omics.
Lots of omics put together, and it's all with the same theme. You're giving more opportunities to do broader discovery to the researcher. And we've got Ethan Stancliffe on the team, who is just a genius for putting this all together. Came out of Gary's lab.
Yeah, we got to say AI and machine learning in a sentence too.
Right.
Yeah, so we use that stuff. Yeah.
So where do you go from here? What's next for the company?
Right now, it's just been a blitz the last 18 months getting all the new technologies out there. And now we've got a commercial team in place that knows how to sell it. We have marketing that is fantastic. Allie Harrison leads from here in St. Louis. And it's really a matter of getting the brand awareness out there, getting the word out, being at the right conferences, putting the right application data together to get the word out, and really start to make an impact with the science that we've developed.
Yeah. And just going back a second about how we started Panome, Tom reminded me that Tom and I were working on a project to find another tools thing. Tom was obviously part of BioGenerator, and we were working with Telegraph Hill to look at the microbiome, and we met Andrew Patterson at University of Pennsylvania, who was looking at microbiome and mass spec, and Tom reminded me that Andrew said, well, wait a minute, you've got the #1 lead global mass spec person in your backyard. Why are you talking to them? And that's how we met Gary. It's,
right.
nothing's ever planned. There's no strategy here, right?
But in terms of a broader strategy, maybe Dave, if you can give a little teaser of where things might be headed in terms of working with BioGenerator and others to build more of these research tools and services companies in the coming years.
Yeah, look, I think we're starting to get our stride, and this is the 6th or 7th company that we've built, and Ed and I have built 3 or 4 of those together. I think we understand what to do, and so we're looking at doing the same thing again. So we've got these new fellows. I don't know where Grant is. Grant, wave your hand, and Guillermo, and we're taking an idea, right, and we're trying to build another tools companies for both of them. Obviously, Guillermo's already a little further along. He's on Cappy Bio, which is a regenerative medicine tools company. But the same idea is to take this idea, leverage the great resources at BioGenerator with both people and resources in lab, and build companies from scratch, from an idea, right? That's the key to the tools world and to what we're trying to do, versus taking some technology to WashU and trying to develop it for 5 years or whatever. And it's about taking these ideas and taking them to ground, right? Yeah.
Great. So let's now turn to the audience for questions. So when you ask your questions, raise your hand and I'll try to call on everyone. Speak loudly, and then I'll repeat the question so that everyone can hear it and we get it on the recording. But first, join me in thanking Dave and Ed for sharing their experiences with us. Yes, over here by the stairs. So Ben asked, professors increased interest in spinning out research for startups given the federal funding situation?
So the answer is screamingly yes, right? They're all, trying to figure out ways to mitigate the loss of funds. What we're looking at is things like another core facility, right? So there are lots of cores that have great capabilities, and how do we do that? We're working with the BioGenerator. Tom Cohen is still involved. We've been working on Haifa is a studio that built Solus and Panome, and Tom is very involved as well, looking at some of these things, and also the fellows and so forth. Grant is working on another project, looking at some of these core facility, looking at immunoprofiling. And we'll see whether or not it can be a standalone or whether it could be part of one of our existing companies. But either way, we're looking at tools, right? For sure.
Yes.
So when you're looking for your new tools, would you say that you have a lot of people when they're developing tools, like developing a hammer to hit the nail? Would you say that your approach is more you find the nail and then go find where the hammer to hit that nail, or is it very good at identifying where the nail is at?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I can repeat that one, but it had to do with, is it a hammer or a nail? Are you kind of taking a technology and trying to figure out where it applies, or are you basically saying there is a need and then finding the tool that fits that need, or how do you do that?
You got to be careful about the cool technology without the application. I always, you see this a lot, right? People are enamored, right, with cool technology, but don't figure out a great application. You need both. You need the hammer and the nail, right? And so you need traction too. So Solus is another one with Ed and I and Tom all worked on and founded with Martha Schlichter. It was another idea where Martha had some revenue for services in one of her companies, Plastomic, which I think you'll actually hear in one of these hours. And Martha said, hey, we don't know what to do with this. I said, hey, let's start a company, right, and spin out this service, which is to make plants. And I don't know what else to say there, but you find traction. They had traction. They had a few $100,000 of stuff. Panome, they had pharmaceutical companies calling Gary, but it's not set up to be a customer service and all, their IP issues and all that other stuff.
Right. So both Solus and Panome, you had a demand signal. You had a
Exactly.
customer coming to you,
Right.
asking for a service.
Right. And I think that's one of the key things is it doesn't have traction, right? For sure.
Yes, right here, and then back in the back.
Earlier you mentioned the idea of a venture studio model, and I guess this is something I've heard of before, but I don't really have a very clear picture of how it operates or what type of environment it is. Could you elaborate a little bit on your experience with that?
Yeah, so what is a venture studio? How does it differ from a venture capital firm? How does it differ from an incubator, from an accelerator? What is it?
Yeah, so venture tends to invest in existing companies. Venture studios tend to take ideas or early nascent, stuff and bring in, entrepreneurs in residence, things like that. So the first one was Canopy, right? We built that and it was sort of the studio model, right? Find the ideas, pull it underneath. It became a company. Haifa was an idea with the BioGenerator and Tom Cohen and myself and Ed, right? And so we brought in, people that could be CEO, right? So the venture studio had people that could immediately, start companies. We had obviously some funding from BioGenerator. They were on the cap table for Haifa. And so that's the difference. You're kind of taking all these resources first and then finding the idea and building it under that. And so that was key. I mean, we needed the Eds and we needed the money. And what's that structure? That's a venture studio.
Right. So talent first, and then start the company from the very beginning.
Right. And
Yeah.
it needed three other things, which is money, money, and money.
Money. Right.
Because,
Right. And we had a question in the back there. Yes.
So, I have an associate in healthcare, but I have a different undergrad, one grad school, one a different social science degree. But I've noticed that there's general tech companies. Do you know anything about biometric startups and does BioSTL or Smoller in general have an appetite to general startups that are starting to investigate biometric methods into verification, identification, and is that something that BioSTL or Smoller has invested in?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the question is really around kind of what is the breadth of the things that BioSTL and BioGenerator invest in, and also would we consider biometric startups or other kind of and then the answer basically is that if it relates to the biological sciences, we'll take a very close look at it. And if you look at our portfolio to date, it's been so far the 136 companies that we've done have been 3/4 in human health and 1/4 in agricultural technologies. And on the human health side, it's been the number one category has been therapeutics, and then relatively equal proportions of med device, diagnostics, health information technology services, and then research tools and services. And so, yeah, if it relates to the biological sciences, I think it's within the scope of our mission.
Is there an appetite for the security side of it as a bio? You know what I mean, with facial recognition?
Yeah, and so in terms of the sort of security side of biometrics, I would say that if you're getting into things where there are innovations that tie back to the biological sciences. So is there something innovative about it? Does it tie into the biological sciences? We'll take a look at it. And so, we're not doing financial security, for instance, or something like that. So that we don't do strict software that doesn't have a biological tie-in. And Dave, you may want to say something about cultivation capital, because we didn't even talk about Dave also, gosh, all the things about, so the things you don't know about, you might not know about Dave. One, he's also a partner at Cultivation Capital. And the reason I mention that is that they've done work in software and financial security. Also, Dave has been the owner of a body part shop. He's a mechanic as well. So
Not body, mechanical.
a mechanical, not body shop.
2
Okay.
years, summa cum laude at Rankin Tech,
Okay.
right? So
Big Bend.
Big Ben Auto Center, give out there, yeah. I was a lube tech for 5 years in my 50s. Tells you how much biotech drove me to.
You needed
becoming
a little
mechanic.
break, a straight more.
I needed a 5-year break.
A little more straightforward business, but
right.
talk about cultivation capital and maybe a little bit about kind of the
Yeah.
breadth of other things that they're investing in.
Sure. And by the way, if you have a check engine light, give me a call. I'm glad to help you out. Cultivation, is an umbrella organization of funds, right? And so we have both fintech, we have technology side, all that IT stuff that I don't understand, and then we have life science. We have life science 1 and 2. Both of those funds are completely invested and are in the kind of harvesting stage. And then we have a number of new funds, one in cardiovascular, one in healthcare IT, and one in ag that's starting. And then we haven't mentioned the HIFA fund, which is we haven't announced. I don't know if we can or what, but
Yeah, sort of unofficial, but we're getting there.
We're trying to partner and really take this studio model to another level with funding. And so the cultivation group is kindly will partner as well because they have all the back office stuff. But it will be a partnership. The activities will be here at the BioGenerator, and so that's. Yeah, well, if anybody, and I'm not soliciting because Chris Reed, the lawyers, were right there, but, if you know anybody that has $20 million, give me a call. But yeah, we're, again, the idea is to.
But good question on kind of where's the scope of kind of like what falls within the life sciences and what falls into other areas of technology, because it is sort of a spectrum. The next question here.
We got any answers?
Okay, maybe we'll do this one, and then there's one more, and then that'll be the last one.
Dave
Yeah.
Briner, another prodigy disciple of all our companies and stuff in the past. There you go. Dave worked for us as well.
You've been a lot of fun to work for, and you've lifted a lot of people up through the course of your career. There's a lot of folks in this audience that are probably drooling, they're shaking their head. It's incredible what you guys have done. Qualitatively speaking, what kind of advice would you give this audience? And what's the most important trait that they can bring to the table as a successful entrepreneur?
And so, yeah, I'd like to hear from each of you on that, and that Dave points out that you've done a lot for a lot of the people in the room, and a lot of us have benefited from your involvement. What has made you successful? What has helped you create these companies? Is that sort of broadly and maybe at the kind of personal level as opposed to just the financial side of things?
Well, what helps you get through the dark times?
What helps you get through the dark times?
That's
Oil changes.
my big secret is find someone like Dave, right? I mean, I'm sometimes think my name is Dave and Ed because that's what I'm always called, right? It's just been, find someone with this kind of ability to see the different parts. We're talking about hammers and nails and see all the pieces and know how to put them together. That's been. I've needed therapy a lot because of it, but yeah, that's been the best part of coming back to St. Louis.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing, right? Look, half the companies that I've built are with Ed, right? And probably because he was too young when I first started my first one. Probably were in high school when I started my first ones,
Grade
right?
school, yeah.
So it probably wasn't available. But it is clearly finding. I do some work for Thompson Street Capital Partners, and they describe what is the big private equity fund, $1.5 billion fund, their most recent one, and their criteria for a CEO is Ed Weinstein, right? Who will chew his fingers off to get revenue. I've told him a million times, slow down. He is always on the road trying to make rain, get those things going. He will do. You're gone like 50 weeks out of the year sometimes.
I didn't know you thought so highly of me. I'm going to have to ask for more money. There's also just a terrific network here. And especially if you get tied in with groups like at BioGenerator, right? None of the stuff that we've talked about works without all the support structures around it. Chris Reed is here from Thompson Coburn. None of this would have been built without him, and Angie Smith from all in.
And before that, Andy Hoyne, by the way, who's right next to him, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a ton of resources here, and BioGenerator connects you to all of them.
Yeah,
So.
and I want to give a shout out to the New Ventures group at, if you're back there somewhere at WashU. They're starting to build resources, EIRs, things like that. BioGenerator has partnered with them around the Fellows Program. You know, again, we're starting to build the right people and intellectual capital. We still need a lot more money, there's no doubt about it. But there's one thing that I always tell people about to be successful, and that is, you know, we all want to, every day we come into work, we chop wood. You know, we do whack-a-mole. We feel at the end of the day we whacked a lot of moles, right? You need to get out and shake some trees, right? The only reason any of these things happen is because it's the collisions, you know, go to conferences, go to talk to people, get out, you know, find those collisions, those opportunities. If Tom and I hadn't talked to Andrew Patterson, we wouldn't have done Panome, right? If we sat there and just did our job and did it well, we would not have had Panome, right? If I had not known Martha Schlichter and spent time with her and listened to her talk about, you know, her issues, we wouldn't have Solus. You know, all those things require shaking trees. So shake some trees.
I think that's a great way to end. So thanks again, Dave and Ed.
You're welcome.
Thank you.